I'm excited to be joined again by Dr. Palmer as we talk about another chapter of our upcoming book around fear mapping. And so for years, we've been hearing our HR leaders asking us, Pam, how do we get people to speak up? There's so much silence in the room. It's like crickets, especially during town halls. They'll ask a question. They really do want perspectives from employees, but people don't speak up. How do we create psychological safety? How do we build the more open culture and bring our values to life? And all amazing questions, but it's the wrong starting point. Because before you can answer any of those questions, you have to answer the very basic, which is, what are people afraid of? Why aren't they speaking up? There's fear back there. And why are they afraid? Dr. Palmer and I were sitting having coffee the other day, and I was asking, is fear the opposite of trust? And then we're like, no, it's what happens when trust is absent. And it's more important, it's what is impossible to rebuild. And so if you have broken trust, fear is actually what might be preventing you from being able to rebuild that trust easy. So you've got to map it, you've got to understand it, name it, and design against it. So that's why fear and fear mapping is getting its own chapter in our book. So, Therese, let's start off. While fear is a very familiar word to people, fear mapping might be a new phrase. So what is fear mapping and why is it important?
Yeah. So the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that fear is a natural occurrence, but it is not naturally growing, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is that when things happen to people, they build a defense around whatever that thing is, right? And so it takes some type of input that challenges or changes the way that you're able to do something for you to now kind of get that embedded. When we talk about mapping or mapping out your fear, what you're doing is naming what is actually happening in the space. And that so often is glossed over. People are just like, hey, people are not trusting, people are not speaking up. They're telling you the behavior that they are seeing, but they can't tell you where the root is coming from. And that's really what fear mapping does. It allows you to see what the root is, because you cannot uproot what you do not know. You cannot uproot things that have no name to. And so that's what we try to do in this chapter, is by the several conversations that we've had, the several times that we have been in spaces where we have seen fear grow from one person and it just takes root throughout an entire team. It comes from some place. It is not arbitrary. And so being able to name what that thing is really what I think is the root of how we begin to challenge and change, as well as design, to make sure that things can be different. And we were laughing in the coffee shop and going back and forth about what is fear, how does fear show up. And I use the analogy of we were in a coffee house. I was like, when you come into a coffee house, you do not have a fear that the coffee house is about to fall. Like, you don't have that fear at all. Like, it never even crossed your mind that was a thing. But that's the funny, but also the very tactile thing that happens in organizations is the same thing. And so when you go into a space like a coffee shop, that's not on the forefront of your mind. You're like, no, I'm not thinking that the foundation is not safe. I'm not thinking that these walls are not going to protect me, that the glass is going to fall. I'm not thinking about any of that, because I know until something happens that allows that to take root, either by your friend saying, hey, do you think this is going to fall down? Or something hitting the glass, a sound, a conversation, something happens, that fear begins to take root. And you now start to look at your surroundings completely different than you were. And the first thing that your body goes to, that fight or flight mode, is safety. Am I safe here? So remember that when we talk about fear mapping and your teams map out their fear, part of that has to do with how they feel safe in the space. Do they feel safe to be able to challenge? Do they feel safe to be able to acknowledge the things that are happening around them in the environment, the policies that are being enacted? Do they feel safe? And if safety now becomes an issue, we can now begin to break down why don't you feel safe? And I can guarantee you're going to get to the root of whatever that fear is.
I love that. And so as an example of that, right, is because I was really challenging like wisdom through assumption and fear and all the inputs that come in that make you afraid. But then you said, but now compare that to an elevator, right? And an elevator, why are we afraid of elevators? Like instinctively we get in, and it's because of the noise that we hear. when we get into an elevator. If an elevator is nice and smooth and it doesn't make any noise, you might have a little bit of like some people tingy, but it's when that elevator starts creaking or making some noise or grinding or giving any kind of movement, that's input into us that sparks that fear that now we're afraid of it. So when you start thinking about the organization, there's going to be things that are going to make certain people afraid. Some people are probably never afraid of elevators. Other people are. But if you don't understand what those inputs are, like what is the noise that people are hearing or the sound or the movement, or they heard a story, what's making them afraid, then you actually can't address it. You can't remove something that you can't name. So talk to me a little bit about what does fear mapping look like in an organization? Like how would we actually go about it?
Yeah. So when we're thinking about going in and talking about this, we are actually asking you to start writing things down. We're not asking you to do this telepathically. Sit with yourself and think about no, you need to write it. You need to write it. You need to be blunt. You need to be direct about it. And in the book, we use a relation of a tree. And we look at the twigs and the branches and the leaves, the crown of a tree. And that's where we begin to mark what exactly are the behaviors that we're seeing, right? What are the things that is happening in our organization that are affecting us? And then once you get down from there and you're building out this tree, look at the trunk as fear and break down the different types of fear that can come up within an organization. What you get down to is the root of the problem. And that root is going directly into that base of that tree that is going to come out in that crown. You got to know where that part came from, right? And so part of that may be mistrust, maybe distrust, maybe favoritism. It's being cynical. Like all these things are roots that make what people not wanting to speak or not wanting to engage in the same ways that they may have done before. It's why you can tell somebody who is excited about that early career professional that comes in and they're on fire and they have everything that they need. And then you got the more seasoned person that's just, we don't need that. That's not how we do. We don't do that here, right? And you can see that the light has gone out of their eyes because under whatever weight that they've been in this organization, that has suppressed the instincts and the light that was there prior to. So you got to be able to write out what that thing exactly is. And in our book, we actually give you a playbook. I want you to make sure to understand what the play is in this. And what I mean by the play, I'm looking at exactly what is happening. So the first thing that you do, the first step is what we call setting the table. You're able to start asking folks about fear, explain the purpose of what we're actually doing, and then start to evaluate how we actually have come to write out what exactly we need to do. So what I mean by that is being able to create what is going on in the organization. You have to be able to have real conversations in that. Then you start to talk about the surface of those behaviors. What are the things that we're seeing in the organization? And then connecting that to actual fear that we're feeling in the organization. That then traces into the root of the problem. And we can start really figuring out exactly how that looks. An example of that could look like in the crown of a tree, people remain silent during meetings. The trunk, what type of fear that they may be going through, maybe the fear of retaliation because something has happened in that organization before. Where are the roots of that? The last employee who challenged the decision was publicly criticized. That is the root of the issue. People are quiet at meetings because they saw what happened the last time. So that's what we mean by actually mapping it out. We use the analogy of the tree because it's really easy to see how those things connect. But really, when you start asking people what happened, and you start being very candid and concise and direct about what is actually going on, people will tell you exactly what happened and they don't forget. My grandma used to always say, "We got long memories." And they remember. They may not say anything, but they remember. And people always remember how you made them feel. They may not know the exact verbiage that you use, but they know how you made them feel and they don't lose that. And I always say with my students, I was like, who's the teacher that you fell in love with? Tell me what their name is. And everybody could tell me that person's name and what they loved about them. It's a teacher that you knew they needed to quit their job. There was no reason for them to continue working. Everybody knows that teacher because of the way that they made them feel. And it does not matter the age the feeling doesn't go away. And that actually is what sets up the criteria for how the workplace continues to allow fear to really overwhelm the processes and the actual outcomes of what's going on in that organization.
I love it. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou. I've got it actually up on my wall right here. It's people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So
absolutely,
I think that's great. So just in a nutshell then, Patrice, is fear wrong or weak or irrational or any of those words?
It's not wrong. It's not weak. It is a signal. And I think we need to look at that as a signal. I think sometimes we get so caught up in saying, well, you're afraid, then, we start adding these other words to, oh, you're a coward, or you just didn't want it. You didn't want it bad enough. All these other different ways that we like to explain away why things are not happening. But in reality, it's a signal. It's telling us something about this environment. When people are not speaking up, when people are downtrodden, when morale is low, it's telling you something. It is really the thermometer of the organization. When we go into an organization, of course, I don't care how much they know is wrong. They're going to give us all the fluff. They're going to tell us all the great things that they've done. And also try to get us to really, hey, make sure that you're speaking about that. I'll speak about this other stuff. But in reality, when you start speaking to staff and you say, what happened? What's going on? They will tell you what is happening. And the bad thing is that you have leaders who their weakness is not listening to the fear. Their weakness is not allowing the organization to heal from whatever is happening. It's not the employees that are going through it that are not rational. It's the folks who are covering it up that actually makes the workplace very toxic and creates the imbalance of our life and our work.
I think this is great. And I think it's so important to give this its own chapter so that we can understand where the fear is coming from. Because when we look at classic change management, for example, and especially let's look at artificial intelligence that's coming in the workforce. In the past, we used change management techniques that said, why are people resistant to change? And sometimes people are resistant because I just don't want to do it, right? It's how, or I've seen it before. And you think about things like you're getting a new system, a new payroll system, or you're asking people to move floors and people are just like, I don't want to do it. And most of the time it's either I'm just stubborn. I've seen this change before. It didn't work 10 years ago. It's not going to work now. But when it comes to AI, it isn't just simply resistance to change. There is actual fear underneath that. And so I see so many companies right now treating AI and AI implementation as in a classic change management, as opposed to let's actually address the real fears. And we may not be able to put them to rest because the fears are real, but we can use data and just naming them and understanding them and appreciating them as we get people to move forward.
Absolutely. I think that honestly is the most human thing you can do is acknowledge. And for whatever reason in organizations, people don't want to do that. They don't want to acknowledge when things are happening. I see that people are being laid off. That's not something that is imagined. It's not irrational. There is a rational reasoning that I am now in fear of my job. And the fact that nobody is acknowledging that makes it so much worse. Going through that process, it's already such a devastating process of when people are having to separate from the organization, especially when it's not something that they wanted to do. But it's also devastating to teams. I very rarely hear people come in and say, okay, these were the ways that we were able to help heal this team when they lost 3 to 5 people, or maybe an entire team that you were working with cross departmentally now doesn't exist anymore. But it doesn't mean that the output still stopped. You still got to create whatever is necessary, but there is no healing for that part. And nobody actually names it. I've walked past Jeff every morning for the last 5 years, and now Jeff doesn't work here. And we just act like he never works here. That's the part that people are talking about. That's what cuts deep. You acknowledging that we're having layoffs and that we're losing some great people and giving them the respect and care that comes with separating them and then giving their team a chance to then recuperate and move forward. People respect that. We all understand things happen, but what we cannot understand is the organizations that have told us to trust them, to believe in the values and the objectives of the organization, to know that we're working for a greater good. That's what we cannot accept. That's where the fear truly comes in, because now you've lied. And let's just name that. You lied. Because again, I get it. Layoffs happen, restructuring happens. People get that. We're adults. We've more than likely been in the workforce for a number of years. We get it. We know things happen. What we cannot understand and what we cannot be okay with is when you try to absolve yourself as though nothing happened and we're not even allowed to address the elephant in the room. That's where the lying takes root. That's where fear becomes a mandate, because guess what? Peggy did nothing to deserve to be laid off and still got laid off anyway. So there's no criteria for this anymore. Because when they originally told us, hey, we're looking at low performance, that's the problem. If you're not performing at standard, then we're going to separate. I trusted that. Peggy was someone who did a lot and was first in, last to lead, did everything you asked her to. And she was one of the first on the chopping block. So it had nothing to do with performance anymore. That means that anybody can be separated, and we have no way of assessing if I'm going to be able to stay or if I'm not. So I'm constantly on edge. And as organizations are doing layoffs, rollouts, like they're happening multiple times within an organization. Because what I can trust is that the rent is always due the first of the month. I can trust that. So that constant for me is going to be the thing that makes me say, maybe I should pull away from this. And that fear is real. Again, I think it comes back to the fear that the organization is not doing what they said that they were going to do. That's the part that is irrational to most people.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you pushing for this to be its own chapter, Patrice, because if we look at trust, which is the basis of the book, right? Trust and employee engagement. If you're either trying to build trust or rebuild trust, and you actively have fear constantly pushing back on your ability to either, again, rebuild or build trust, if you don't identify it, if you don't acknowledge it and name it, it's going to take you a very long time, if ever, to get that trust. So I'm glad you pushed for it to be its own chapter. I'm really excited about the playbook of how do you actually map the fear within the workplace so that you can begin to address those specific behaviors that are causing the fear and eventually the distrust. So really excited about this chapter and excited for your stories.
I'm going to be I'm always pessimistic about building stuff.
Yes.
Because I know that the ground moves. So like if the ground, I can't even trust the ground that I'm walking on. Hey, I need to be here and keep my hand on the swivel. But no, I appreciate us having that conversation again. I think some of our best work happens when we're just sitting around talking to each other and saying, hey, what about this thing? Because it gives us the capacity and it gives us the ability to be able to push against. Why did you say this? And why is this a thing? And tell me more about this. Because one of the things I think that came up when we were talking about it is a lot of times organizations want to fix things in private. Okay, we made a mistake. Let's privately do that. And that builds the resentment, that builds bitterness, and also creates secrecy within the organization because we actually know it happened. Nobody's talking about it, and they're kind of like trying to sweep it under the rug, so it just isn't this big thing. And I guarantee you, even now, there are organizations, there are people who are sitting around these giant tables who have implemented AI ineffectively, inappropriately, and are sitting there going, yeah, we fucked up. We kind of fired like those thousands of people. We need at least half of them back. And somebody's trying to secretly be like, hey, you already got fired? Can you come back? Because the minute that you lose your employees, you're going to lose your customers. Because guess what? They are still connected. Employees in your customer base are still connected in various ways. You lose them, you're going to lose your customer base, and then you ultimately lose your business.
Yeah. And I do think that there's research or a stat out there somewhere that says the more you curse, the more people trust you. So let's put that somewhere in here.
It's going to be written in.
I'll end with this for me is this work is hard when you're talking about culture, when you're talking about inclusion, when you're talking about people feeling a sense of belonging so that they will speak up and have psychological safety and everything that goes around trust and engagement. Because this is not easy. And it does take some apologizing and some going back and going, yikes, what's going on? And some listening. And it takes conversation. It takes people talking. And so I really, whenever I hear the words, like, if you would just do this, my whole body starts to, because it is tough, but it also can be so much fun when you actually get to the point where you're listening to your employees, they hear you, they know they're being heard, and they tell you more. So maybe there'll be another chapter in there about why Pam hates the word just.
It might be a whole book because you do definitely have a visceral, there's a physical reaction when you see or hear that. You've gotten better though, because now you're like, tell me more instead of okay.
As opposed to rolling my eyes and walking out.
Right.
I did. That is, whoever gave me that phrase, tell me more. That probably saved my career many times. But
yes.
With that, Patrice, I'm excited about this chapter and excited about the ones to come.
It's time for us to do something different. We're in a different age. We're in a different mindset. And again, it comes back to all of our welcome falls flat when you have not been intentional about creating things with people in mind. And I think that's something that we are striving to every time we do anything, is that we're thinking about a lot of different types of people in our work. I think that's what makes us kind of revolutionary in this, is because it's not a one size fits all. We recognize that being true to size is what really allows people to do their best and be their best and to flourish in their work. Continuously excited about the work, and cheers to more times we're sitting in a coffee shop and I'm scaring you out of your mind.
Talk to you soon, Patrice. Look forward to the next chapter.